The massive space station hung in the void, like a silver crown. Its 8 arms stretched out from a central hub, each one bigger than most cities on Earth. Thousands of ships from different worlds docked at its ports every day. This was Harmony Station. It's the most important place in the galaxy where different alien species came to talk and make deals. Ginho. Park looked out the window of his transport ship as they got closer to the station. He was tall for a human, with neat black hair and calm dark eyes. His blue diplomatic uniform was perfectly pressed. As Earth's top ambassador, he had spent 10 years learning how to talk to aliens and understand their ways. "Sir, we will dock in 15 minutes," said Soman Lee from the seat beside him. She was younger than Jinho, maybe 30 years old, with short hair and bright, intelligent eyes. Her job was to help translate the many alien languages they would hear during the talks. She spoke 17 different alien languages, better than most of the aliens themselves. "Are you nervous, Soman?" Ginho asked with a small smile. "A little," she admitted. "This is the biggest meeting in human history. If we succeed, Earth becomes a full member of the Galactic Council. If we fail, ... we won't fail," Jinho said firmly. "Humans have something special. We never give up. We always find a way to make friends." The transport ship shook slightly as it connected to the docking port. Through the thick windows, Jinho could see the inside of the station. It was huge beyond imagination. The ceiling was so high, it disappeared into darkness. Millions of lights twinkled like stars. Flying vehicles moved in organized patterns through the air. And everywhere there were aliens. Some aliens walked on 2 legs like humans, but had blue skin and extra arms. Others looked like giant insects with shiny shells. Some floated in the air inside clear bubbles filled with gas. A few were so strange that Jinho could not even guess what they were. "Welcome to Harmony Station," came a voice from the ship's speakers. It spoke in perfect English, but Jinho could hear the electronic translation working. "Ambassador Park, the Galactic Council is ready to meet you." Ginho and Soman gathered their things. They had 3 large cases full of documents, gifts, and information about Earth. Jinho also carried a special briefcase that contained the formal request for Earth to join the Galactic Council. As they walked through the airlock into the station, Jinho felt the artificial gravity adjust to match Earth normal. The air smelled clean but had a slight metallic taste. The corridor they entered was wide enough for 10 humans to walk side by side. The walls were made of some kind of smooth white material that seemed to glow with its own light. "This way, please," said their guide. A thin alien with purple skin and large yellow eyes. Its name was Coordinator Vex, and it worked for the station's diplomatic services. The other ambassadors are already gathering in the main conference room. They followed Vex through corridor after corridor. Ginho tried to remember the way, but the station was like a maze. They passed shops selling strange foods, banks that handled money from 100 different worlds, and information centers were being shared news from across the galaxy. "Tell me about the other species we will meet," Ginho asked Vex as they walked. "There are 43 different species on the Galactic Council," Vex replied. "The most powerful is the Valdari Empire. They control 47 star systems and have been part of the Council for over 800 years. Their Emperor, Thane Corvacus, leads their delegation." Soman touched Jinho's arm and whispered, "I've read about the Valdari. They are warriors. Very proud. They believe in strength above everything else. What do they think about humans joining the Council?" Jinho asked. Vex's yellow eyes blinked slowly. "Some species welcome new members. Others prefer things to stay as they are." They entered a huge circular room with a domed ceiling. The room had seats arranged in rings, like an ancient Roman theater. Each section was designed for different types of beings. Some seats were filled with water for ocean creatures. Others were surrounded by different kinds of air for beings who breathed different gases. In the center of the room was a raised platform where speakers could address everyone. Large screens showed translations in dozens of languages. The noise was incredible. Hundreds of different voices speaking, clicking, buzzing, and making sounds that human ears could barely hear. The human delegation announced a loud voice. Every conversation in the room stopped. Hundreds of alien eyes turned to look at Jinho, and so Min.Jin-Ho felt the weight of their attention, but kept his face calm and friendly. He had practiced this moment many times. Somin walked beside him with her head held high, carrying herself with dignity. They were shown 2 seats in the newcomer section. It was smaller than the areas for the established members, but Jinho didn't mind. Everyone had to start somewhere. As they sat down, Jinho noticed a particularly large group of aliens across the room. They were tall, maybe 8 feet high, with thick scales that changed color in the light. They had 4 arms each and heads that looked somewhat like earth lizards, but much more intelligent. Their eyes were cold and calculating. "The Faldari," Somin whispered. In the center of the Faldari group sat the largest one of all. His scales were darker than the others, almost black, and they seemed to shimmer with their own light. 4 thick arms crossed over his massive chest. When he turned his head to look at the humans, Jinho felt like he was being examined by a predator deciding if he was worth hunting. "Emperor Corvacus," Somin breathed. The Emperor stared at them for a long moment. Then, very slowly, his mouth curved into what might have been a smile, but on his reptilian face, it looked more like a threat. "Welcome, humans," came the Emperor's voice through the translation system. It was deep and powerful. "We look forward to learning what you have to offer the galaxy." The words were polite, but something in his tone made Jinho's skin crawl. He had heard that same tone before, from people who smiled while they planned your destruction. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Jinho replied, standing and bowing slightly. "Earth is honored to be here." The Emperor's smile grew wider, showing sharp white teeth. As Jinho sat back down, he noticed Somin was taking notes on her tablet. Her fingers moved quickly as she recorded details about each species and their body language. She had always been good at reading between the lines. "What do you think?" Jinho whispered to her. "Some of them seem friendly," she whispered back. "But the Valdared." She paused and looked across the room at the Emperor. "I think they see us as a threat." "A threat? We're just one planet. They have 47 star systems." "That's exactly why," Somin said quietly. "We went from riding horses to traveling between stars in just a few hundred years. Most species take thousands of years to reach space. We're growing too fast for their comfort." Jinho considered this. He had always thought of humans as peaceful explorers, eager to make friends with other species. It had never occurred to him that their rapid progress might frighten the older civilizations. The formal session began with long speeches about galactic peace and cooperation. Each major species took turns talking about their achievements and their hopes for the future. Jinho listened carefully, but he found himself watching Emperor Corvacus more than the speakers. The Valdari Emperor sat perfectly still during the other speeches, but his eyes never stopped moving. He studied each speaker, each reaction from the audience, each detail of the room around him. This was not someone who left anything to chance. When it was finally time for the human presentation, Jinho stood and walked to the central platform. His speech had been prepared for months and reviewed by the best diplomatic minds on Earth. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "Humanity comes before you today, not as conquerors or competitors, but as friends seeking to join a community of civilized worlds." He spoke for 20 minutes about Earth's achievements, their desire for peace, and their hope to contribute to galactic civilization. He talked about human art, science, and philosophy. He showed images of Earth cities, its blue oceans, and its diverse peoples. The audience listened politely. Some seemed genuinely interested. Others appeared bored. But Emperor Corvacus never took his eyes off Jinho. His expression never changed from that predatory smile. When Jinho finished his speech and returned to his seat, he felt he had done well. The applause was respectful, if not enthusiastic. Several smaller species sent messages of support, but as the session ended and the delegates began to leave, Emperor Corvacus rose from his seat and walked directly toward the human section. His 4 arms swayed as he moved, and other delegates stepped quickly out of his way. "Ambassador Park," the Emperor said, voice rumbling like distant thunder. Your presentation was ... interesting. Perhaps we could discuss it further over dinner tomorrow night. Jinho felt every instinct telling him to refuse, but diplomatic protocol required him to accept. Of course, Your Majesty. We would be honored. Excellent, the Emperor replied. I do so enjoy getting to know our potential new members. It helps me understand exactly what they might contribute to our galaxy. As the Emperor walked away, his entourage following behind him like a dark cloud, Somin moved closer to Jinho. I don't like this, she whispered. Neither do I, Jinho admitted. But we have to. The next evening came too quickly for Jinho's comfort. He stood in front of the mirror in his quarters, adjusting his formal diplomatic uniform. The dark blue fabric was decorated with small silver pins that showed his rank and achievements. On his chest, he wore the symbol of Earth, a small blue and green circle that represented humanity's home world. So Min entered his room carrying a small device that looked like a pen. Security scanner, she explained. I've been checking our quarters every few hours. Someone has been listening to our conversations. Jinho frowned. Are you sure? Very sure. There are at least 3 different types of listening devices hidden in the walls. They're good, but not good enough to hide from Earth technology. She put the scanner in her pocket. Jinho, I really think we should cancel this dinner. We can't. It would be seen as an insult to the Emperor. That would definitely end our chances of joining the council. Jinho picked up his briefcase. Inside were gifts for the Emperor and important documents about Earth's trade. Capabilities. What if that's exactly what he wants? Somin asked. What if he's hoping we'll insult him so he has an excuse to vote against us? Jinho considered this. Somin was usually right about these things. She had spent years studying alien psychology and political behavior. But he was trained to believe that diplomacy could solve any problem. We'll be careful, he decided. Stay alert, watch for anything unusual, and be ready to leave quickly if needed. They left their quarters and walked through the station's corridors toward the diplomatic dining hall. The station felt different at night. The lights were dimmer, and fewer beings moved through the passages. Their footsteps echoed off the metal walls. The dining hall was impressive. It was a large circular room with a high ceiling painted to look like a star field. The walls were covered with decorations from dozens of different worlds. In the center was a long table that could seat 50 people, but tonight it was set for only 12. Emperor Corvacus was already there when they arrived. He stood at the head of the table, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of welcome. His dark scales reflected the soft lighting, making him look like a living shadow. Around the table sat 10 other Faldari, all wearing military uniforms with bright medals. Ambassador Park, Miss Lee, the Emperor said, his voice booming through the room. Welcome to our table. Please, sit here beside me. Jinho and Somin took the seats the Emperor indicated. They were close enough to him that Jinho could smell something like sulfur coming from the alien's skin. The Emperor's yellow eyes watched them constantly, never blinking. Tell me about your world, the Emperor said as servants began bringing food. The servants were small, gray aliens with large eyes and quick movements. They placed plates of strange-looking food in front of each guest. Jinho began describing Earth, its history, its people, its achievements. He talked about human art and music, about their cities, and their efforts to protect their environment. The Emperor listened with apparent interest, asking questions that showed he already knew quite a lot about humanity. You humans are remarkable, the Emperor said during the main course. In just a few centuries, you went from primitive tribes to space travelers. Most species take thousands of years to accomplish what you did so quickly. We've been fortunate, Jinho replied modestly. We learned from our mistakes and worked together to solve our problems. Yes, working together. The Emperor's mouth curved into that predatory smile again. That's what makes you dangerous. The words hung in the air like a threat. Somin shifted in her seat and gave Jinho a warning look. The other Faldari at the table had stopped eating and were watching the humans with cold eyes. Dangerous? Jinho asked, keeping his voice calm. We come in peace, Your Majesty. We want only friendship and cooperation. Of course you do, the Emperor said. Now, but what happens when you realize you're stronger than us? What happens when your rapid growth makes you the most powerful species in the galaxy? Will you still want cooperation then? Jinho felt the temperature in the room seem to drop. Humanity has no desire for conquest or domination. We believe all species can benefit from working together. How noble, one of the other Valdari said with a sneer. And how naive. The Emperor raised one of his hands for silence. My apologies, Ambassador. General Thal sometimes speaks too freely, but his concerns are shared by many in the galaxy. You humans expand so quickly, learn so fast, adapt so easily. Some find that troubling. We understand those concerns. Soman spoke for the first time since sitting down. That's why we want to join the Council. We want to be part of the Galactic community, bound by its laws and customs. Laws can be changed, the Emperor replied. Customs can be abandoned, but nature never changes. And human nature, from what we've observed, is to dominate whatever environment you enter. Ginho was about to respond when the Emperor stood and raised his glass. The liquid inside was a deep purple color that seemed to glow in the dim light. But enough of such serious talk, the Emperor said, his tone becoming friendly again. Tonight we celebrate the possibility of new friendship, to humanity and to the future of the galaxy. All the Valdari stood and raised their glasses. Jinho and Saman stood as well, lifting their own glasses of the strange purple liquid, to friendship and cooperation. Jinho replied. He was about to drink when Saman suddenly grabbed his arm. Her eyes were wide with alarm as she stared at something behind him. Jinho, don't drink that, she whispered urgently. Look at the walls. Jinho turned and felt his blood freeze. Small panels in the walls had opened, revealing the black muzzles of energy weapons. There were dozens of them, all pointed at the human delegation. You humans are indeed remarkable, the Emperor said, his friendly mask finally dropping completely. But you're also incredibly stupid. Did you really think we would allow a species like yours to gain power in the galaxy? Energy weapons began to glow with a deadly red light. Jinho realized they had walked directly into a trap. The dinner invitation, the friendly conversation, even the location of their seats, everything had been planned. Your Majesty, Jinho said desperately. This is a diplomatic station. There. Are laws made by the strong to control the weak? The Emperor interrupted. And we are very, very strong. The weapons fired. Red energy bolts filled the dining hall like deadly lightning. Jinho threw himself sideways, pulling Saman with him. But she was already moving, throwing herself in front of him as the first volt struck. 3 energy bolts hit Saman in the chest and shoulder. The impacts threw her backward into Jinho's arms. Her diplomatic uniform was burned and smoking. Blood ran from her mouth as she looked up at him with fading eyes. Salman. Oh. Ginho shouted, catching her as she fell. More energy bolts flew over their heads as they crashed to the floor behind an overturned table. The other human delegates at the far end of the table were trying to take cover. But the weapons had clear shots at them, so Dashmin gripped Jinho's hand with surprising strength. Her breathing was shallow and painful, but her eyes were still alert. The Emperor, she gasped. He thinks we're weak, soft, like our diplomats are all we have. Don't talk, Jinho said, pressing his hands against her wounds to try to stop the bleeding. Help is coming. We're going to be okay. Salman managed a weak smile. No, I'm not. But Jinho, they don't know about our other side. She reached into her jacket with trembling fingers and pulled out a small data chip. Send it to Earth. Show them. Show them what really happened here. So Dashmin, please. Promise me, she whispered, her voice growing weaker. Promise me they'll know the truth. Promise me they'll understand. What we died for, I promise, Jinho said, tears streaming down his face. Soman squeezed his hand one last time. Tell them, the Valdari think. Humans are just diplomats, and scientists, and peaceful explorers. Her eyes closed and she drew one last shuddering breath. They have no idea what else we can be. Jinho held her lifeless body as energy bolts continued to flash overhead. Round the room he could hear the screams of other human delegates. Some were wounded, others were dead. The attack was coordinated and brutal, clearly planned to leave no survivors. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the weapons stopped firing. Emergency alarms began blaring throughout the station. Heavy footsteps approached their hiding place. "Check them all," came the Emperor's voice. "Make sure none of them survived." Ginho closed Solomon's eyes and carefully took the data chip from her hand. He slipped it into a hidden pocket in his belt, just as Valdari soldiers reached their position. "This one's alive," one soldier reported. "Good," the Emperor said, appearing beside them. His forearms were folded across his chest, and he looked down at Jinho with satisfaction. "We need at least one survivor to report back to Earth, to tell them what happens when inferior species try to rise above their stationed." Ginho looked up at the Emperor with hatred burning in his eyes. "You killed innocent people under a flag of truce. The galaxy will know what you've done. Will they?" the Emperor asked with amusement. "The official report will show this was a terrorist attack by anti-integration extremists. I will personally express my deepest sympathies for your loss. And Earth, shocked by this tragedy, will withdraw there." The emergency transport ship carrying Jinho back to Earth traveled through hyperspace at maximum speed. He sat alone in the medical bay, staring at Soman's personal belongings that had been returned to him. Her translation device, her notebooks full of alien language studies, were nowhere, and her small jade bracelet that she never took off. But the most important thing she had left him was hidden in his belt. The data chip contained intercepted communications that proved Emperor Corvacus had planned the entire attack. Somin had died to get him this evidence. And now, Jinho carried the weight of that sacrifice. The ship's captain, a stern woman named Haewon Kim, found him in the medical bay 3 days into their journey home. "Ambassador," she said quietly, "we've received word from Earth. The news of the attack has reached the public." Jinho looked up. "What's the reaction?" "Anger," Captain Kim replied simply. "The footage of the attack was broadcast on every news network. The image of Miss Lee throwing herself in front of those energy bolts? It's everywhere. People are calling her a hero." Jinho nodded. Solomon was indeed a hero, but he knew her death meant much more than that. She had become a symbol of something the galaxy didn't understand about humanity. "The President wants to speak with you as soon as we arrive," Captain Kim continued. "There's going to be an emergency session of the Global Council." When their ship finally docked at Luna Station, Ginho was met by a full military honor guard. As he walked through the corridors, he saw that every screen was showing the same image: Soman's final moments, her desperate attempt to save him, and her death in his arms. The shuttle ride to Earth was quiet. Jinho watched his homeworld grow larger in the window and felt something he had never experienced before. For the first time in his career as a diplomat, he wanted revenge. President Na-young Kim was waiting for him in the emergency session chamber. She was a small woman with gray hair and intelligent eyes, but today she looked older than her years. Around the circular table sat the leaders of Earth's major nations and the heads of various government departments. "Ginho," the president said as he entered, "I'm sorry for your loss. Soman was one of our best. Thank you, Madam President." Jinho took his seat and placed his briefcase on the table. "I have something you need to see." He pulled out the data chip and inserted it into the table's computer system. The room's screens lit up with translated Feldari communications. The messages were clear. Emperor Corvacus had ordered the attack days before the dinner. He had planned to kill the entire human delegation and make it look like terrorism. The room fell silent as they read the evidence. Finally, Defense Minister Geneseo Park spoke up. "This is an act of war," he said angrily. "They murdered our people under a diplomatic flag. We should mobilize the fleet immediately." "And do what?" asked Foreign Minister Donghain Lee. "Fight a war against an empire that has 47 star systems? We'd be destroyed, so we do nothing." Defense Minister Park shot back. "We let them get away with murder?" The argument continued for several minutes, voices rising as the two sides debated military action versus diplomatic protests. Ginho listened to it all, remembering Soman's final words. Finally, a quiet voice spoke from the end of the table. Perhaps, said Director of Special Operations, Tajin Choi. We're thinking about this the wrong way. Everyone turned to look at him. Tajin was an older man with weathered features and scars on his hands that spoke of a violent past. His department officially didn't exist, and most people in the government preferred not to ask what he did. Explain, President Kim said. Emperor Corvacus thinks he understands us. Tajin continued calmly. He sees our diplomats, our scientists, our peaceful exploration missions. He thinks that's all we are, isn't it? Foreign Minister Lee asked. Tajin's smile was cold. No, it's not. He stood and walked to the wall display, pulling up a star map that showed human colonies and trade routes. For 200 years, we've been exploring the galaxy with one face, the diplomatic face. We send ambassadors and scientists and teachers. We build trade relationships and cultural exchanges. And that's made the other species think we're soft. What are you suggesting? President Kim asked, though Jinho suspected she already knew. I'm suggesting it's time they met our other face, Taijin replied. The one we've kept hidden since we reached the stars. Defense Minister Park leaned forward. You're talking about the black projects. I'm talking about showing. Emperor Corvacus? What happens when someone mistakes our kindness for weakness? Taijin said. We've spent decades pretending that humans are just peaceful explorers, but we both know that's not the whole truth. Jinho found himself thinking of Earth's history. Humans had indeed been explorers and diplomats, but they had also been warriors when necessary. They had fought wars, survived disasters, and overcome challenges that would have destroyed other species. They had just chosen not to show that side of themselves to the galaxy. What exactly are you proposing? President Kim asked. Tajin returned to his seat and pulled out a secured tablet. We send a replacement diplomatic team to continue the talks. Someone experienced and calm who can restore confidence in human intentions. That makes sense? Foreign Minister Lee said. Who did you have in mind? Ambassador Haijin Song, Taijin replied. She's perfect for the role. Experienced, respected, and known for her peaceful approach to conflict resolution. And President Kim prompted because she knew there was more. And we also send someone else, Taijin continued. Someone with different credentials. Someone who can operate outside diplomatic channels. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what he was suggesting. Even if they didn't want to say it out loud, you're talking about assassination. Foreign Minister Lee said quietly. I'm talking about justice, Taijin corrected. Salmon Lee died carrying evidence of a war crime. Ambassador Park nearly died in what was supposed to be a peaceful diplomatic meeting. Emperor Corvacus thinks he can murder our people and face no consequences. The galaxy would never forgive us if they found out. Defense Minister Park said. They won't find out, Tajin replied confidently, because officially it won't happen. President Kim studied the scarred man carefully. She had known him for 15 years and had never regretted trusting his judgment. Tell me about this other person you want to send, she said. Tajin's smile grew wider. Have you ever heard the old Russian stories about Baba Yaga? Jinho frowned. The witch who lived in the forest? The witch who could be helpful or terrible, depending on how you approached her, Taijin corrected. In human military circles, we use that name for something else entirely. He pulled up a classified file on his tablet. The information was heavily encrypted. But Ginho could see enough to understand what he was looking at. We've been preparing for this possibility since we first made contact. With alien civilizations, Taijin explained, we hoped we'd never need it, but we knew that someday someone would test us. Test us how? President Kim asked. By assuming that our peaceful nature meant we couldn't be dangerous when necessary, Taijin replied. Emperor Corvacus has made that mistake. Now he's going to learn why every human child knows the story of Baba Yaga. The room was, quiet as everyone considered what he was proposing. It went against everything humanity had presented to the galaxy for 2 centuries. It was dangerous, illegal by interstellar law, and would change how other species saw them forever. But Jinho thought of Soman's final words, of her sacrifice, and of the Emperor's satisfied smile as he watched human diplomats die. I support Director Choi's plan, he said firmly. President Kim nodded slowly. Very well. But I want to be clear about something. This operation officially does not exist. If anything goes wrong, if this person is caught, if the galaxy discovers what we're doing, they won't, Taijin assured her. The Baba Yaga program has been active for 50 years, and no one has ever suspected we had such capabilities. Who is she? Ginho asked. Someone who will make Emperor Corvacus regret underestimating humanity, Taijin replied. Someone who will teach him that there's a difference between choosing peace and being unable to wage war. As the meeting ended and the participants filed out, Jinho remained behind with Taijin. Will it work? Ginho asked. It will work, Taijin assured him. Emperor Corvacus thinks he knows everything about humans. He's studied our diplomatic missions, our trade agreements, our scientific expeditions. He thinks that's all we are, but it's not. Taijin's scarred hand touched a metal on his jacket that Jinho had never noticed before. It was small and black, with a symbol that looked like a house with chicken legs. Ginho, he said quietly. The galaxy is about to learn that humans have been telling them fairy tales for 200 years, and every good fairy tale has a monster in it. Outside the government building, the citizens of Earth continued to mourn Salmon Lee. Her image was on every screen, her sacrifice remembered in every news report. She had become the symbol of human courage and dedication. But in a secure facility beneath the Swiss Alps, a different kind of preparation was taking place. Someone was getting ready to show the galaxy a side of humanity that had been carefully hidden for centuries. The Baba Yaga was coming, and Emperor Corvacus had no idea what he had awakened. 3 weeks after the massacre at Harmony Station, a new human diplomatic ship approached the same docking bay where Jinho and Salmon had first arrived. This time the ship carried Ambassador Hejane Song, a woman known throughout the galaxy for her calm wisdom and peaceful solutions to difficult problems. The media coverage was enormous. Every major news network in the galaxy was present to see how humanity would respond to the tragedy. Many expected the humans to withdraw their application and return to Earth in shame and fear. Ambassador Song did not disappoint those expectations. She was exactly what the galaxy expected from humans, dignified, polite, and focused on peace above all else. In her first press conference, she spoke about forgiveness and the importance of not letting violence destroy the dream of galactic cooperation. We must not allow the actions of a few extremists to poison the relationship between our species, she said to the assembled reporters. Humanity still believes in the power of words over weapons, of understanding over hatred. Emperor Corvacus watched the broadcast from his private quarters and smiled with satisfaction. The humans were behaving exactly as he had predicted. They were weak, emotional creatures who would rather talk than fight. The death of their diplomats had frightened them into submission, but while the galaxy's attention was focused on Ambassador Song's peaceful words, another ship was docking at a different part of Harmony Station. This vessel was much smaller. A simple cargo transport that barely registered on the station's traffic control systems. Its manifest listed routine supplies for the station's research laboratories and a single passenger, Dr. Manesio Kong, a xenobiologist studying alien dietary requirements. Her credentials were perfect, showing years of research into how different species processed various nutrients. The woman who walked off the ship certainly looked like a harmless scientist. She was middle-aged, with graying hair and kind eyes behind simple glasses. She wore the plain brown clothes, typical of academic researchers, and carried only a small bag of personal belongings. Station security barely glanced at her identification as she passed through customs. Dr. Manesio Kang was exactly what her paperwork claimed, a quiet scientist, here to study alien nutrition. Nothing about her suggested danger or deception, but Dr. Manesio Kong had died in a shuttle accident 3 years earlier. The woman using her identity moved through the station's corridors with the unhurried pace of someone who belonged there. She spoke politely to the beings she encountered, asked simple questions about laboratory facilities, and seemed genuinely interested in the research opportunities available on the station. Her quarters were small and simple, designed for temporary visitors rather than important guests. She unpacked her few belongings carefully, placing books about alien biology on the desk and hanging her spare clothes in the small closet to any observer. She was exactly what she appeared to be, a boring academic pursuing boring research. But that night, after the station's main lights had dimmed and most beings had retired to their quarters, she began to show her true nature. Her first stop was a maintenance shaft 3 levels below her quarters. Her fingers found hidden latches that shouldn't have existed, revealing a small cache of equipment that had been placed there weeks earlier. The tools she retrieved looked like normal scientific instruments, but they had been modified in ways that would have impressed military engineers. Her second stop was the HFY station's central computer core. Using access codes that officially didn't exist, she downloaded detailed maps of every corridor, every room, and every security system on the station. She also accessed personnel files, learning the daily routines of dozens of beings who had no idea they were being studied. Her third and most important stop was a secure communication node hidden inside what appeared to be a water recycling plant. There, she sent a single encrypted message back to Earth using quantum channels that could not be intercepted. Package delivered. Target confirmed. Beginning operation. The response came back within seconds. Understood. Clean sweep authorized. Leave no traces. As she made her way back to her quarters, the woman allowed herself a small smile. Emperor Corvacus had made the fatal mistake of believing his own propaganda about human limitations. He had studied their diplomats and scientists, their peaceful missions, and cultural exchanges. He thought that was all humanity had to offer. He was about to learn otherwise. Back in her simple quarters, she sat down at her desk and began to plan. From her bag, she pulled out what looked like a standard research tablet. But when she activated it with her palm print, it revealed something very different. The screen showed detailed psychological profiles of every Aldari involved in the attack on the human delegation. Their fears, their weaknesses, their daily routines, and their personal relationships. She had spent months learning everything there was to know about them. At the top of the list was Emperor Corvacus himself. The file contained information about his eating habits, his sleep patterns, his favorite entertainment, and his deepest anxieties. It even included details about his childhood trauma and the political pressures that had shaped his violent worldview. But she wouldn't start with the Emperor. That would be too obvious and would put him on guard. Instead, she would begin with the smaller fish and work her way up the chain of command. Each death would look natural or accidental. Nothing that could be traced back to human involvement. Her first target was Security Chief Voxthal, the Valdari general who had planned the specific details of the attack. According to his file, he had a weakness for a particular type of alcoholic beverage made from fermented Kepler fruits. He also suffered from a rare heart condition that required daily medication. More importantly, he would be dining alone tomorrow night in his private quarters, following a routine he had maintained for 15 years. The woman who called herself Dr. Menesio Kong spent the rest of the night modifying her scientific equipment. By morning, she had created several substances that looked exactly like legitimate research materials but would serve very different purposes. The next day, she visited the station's agricultural section, claiming to need samples of various alien foods for her nutrition research. The Kepler fruits she obtained were perfect specimens, and the agricultural supervisor was happy to help such a dedicated scientist. That evening, she made her way to the service corridors that ran behind the residential quarters. Her movements were careful and precise, following routes she had memorized from the station schematics. Security cameras mysteriously developed technical glitches as she passed, showing empty corridors where she had walked moments before. General Thal's quarters were protected by multiple layers of security, but the systems had been designed to keep out conventional threats. They were not prepared for someone who understood their weaknesses better than their designers did. She entered through the ventilation system, moving silently through passages barely large enough for a human body. Her modified scientific instruments allowed her to bypass electronic locks and disable alarm systems without leaving any trace of tampering. General Thal was exactly where her intelligence had predicted, sitting at his dining table. Enjoying his evening meal and his favorite Kepler fruit wine, he was reading reports on his tablet, completely unaware that death had just entered his quarters. The woman studied him for several minutes, noting his breathing patterns and the slight tremor in his hands that indicated his heart medication was wearing off. Everything had to be perfect. This had to look completely natural. She waited until he finished his wine and poured himself another glass. That's when she acted. The modified Kepler fruit extract she had prepared worked exactly as intended. It interacted with his heart medication in a way that mimicked a massive cardiac event. To any doctor performing an autopsy, it would appear that General Thal had suffered natural heart failure brought on by stress and too much alcohol. The general collapsed within minutes, clutching his chest as his four hearts went into fatal arrhythmia. His last conscious thought was confusion. He had been feeling fine all day, and his medication was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of episode. By the time station security found his body the next morning, the woman was back in her laboratory, carefully documenting the nutritional content of various alien vegetables. When questioned by investigators, she expressed appropriate shock and sadness at the general's unexpected death. Such a tragedy, she told the security officer, taking her statement. He seemed like such a strong, healthy being. I suppose you never know when medical conditions might catch up with you. The investigation concluded that General Thal had died of natural causes, possibly aggravated by the stress of recent events. His funeral was attended by hundreds of Faldari military officers, including Emperor Corvacus himself. The emperor spoke eloquently about his fallen general, praising his loyalty and dedication. But privately, he was beginning to feel the first stirrings of unease. Thal had been in perfect health, with access to the best medical care in the galaxy. His sudden death seemed suspicious, even if the doctors insisted it was natural. More troubling were the reports his remaining intelligence officers were giving him. Several of their agents embedded throughout the station had missed their scheduled check-ins. Their handlers claimed that Emperor Corvacus stood in his private chambers, staring at the reports spread across his massive desk. 3 more of his intelligence operatives had vanished in the past week. Officially, they had all requested emergency leave for family reasons, but their supervisors couldn't reach them for confirmation. General Thal's replacement, Colonel Zex Morvac, entered the room with obvious nervousness. The colonel was younger than Thal had been, with bright green scales and sharp yellow eyes that darted around the room as if expecting attack. Your Majesty, Colonel Morvac said with a deep bow, I've completed the security review you requested, and I've found nothing concrete but ... The colonel hesitated. There are patterns that concern me. Emperor Corvacus gestured for him to continue. Since Thal's death, the emperor had been sleeping poorly and eating little. Something was hunting his people, but he couldn't identify what it was. All the missing operatives were involved in planning or executing the attack on the human delegation, Colonel Morvac reported. The timing could be coincidental, but ... double quotes. But you don't believe in coincidences, the emperor finished. No, Your Majesty. I think someone is systematically eliminating everyone who participated in that operation. The emperor's 4 hands clenched into fists. The humans. But they're still here, still pursuing their pathetic diplomatic mission. Their new ambassador spends her time apologizing and begging for forgiveness. Perhaps that's exactly what they want us to think, the colonel suggested carefully. Emperor Corvacus considered this. He had studied human psychology for years, learning about their emotional weaknesses and their tendency to avoid conflict. Everything he knew about them suggested they would respond to the attack with protests and legal challenges, not violence. But General Thal was dead, and his best agents were missing. Double the security around all remaining personnel involved in the operation, he ordered. I want bodyguards, surveillance, and regular check-ins every hour. Yes, Your Majesty and Colonel. Find out everything you can about the humans currently on this station. Every diplomat, every scientist, every maintenance worker. I want to know where they came from, what they're doing here, and who they really are." As Colonel Morvac left to carry out his orders, the Emperor walked to his window and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, the home world of a species he had dismissed as weak and primitive. Had he made a mistake? 5 levels below the Emperor's chambers, Dr. Manesio Kong was having lunch in the station's public cafeteria. She sat alone at a small table, reading a research journal while eating a simple meal of vegetables and synthetic protein to anyone watching. She appeared completely absorbed in her academic work. Her fingers moved slowly as she took notes about alien dietary requirements. And she occasionally smiled at particularly interesting discoveries, but her enhanced hearing was recording every conversation within 50 meters. Her modified eyes were tracking the movement of every security officer in the room, and her enhanced brain was processing tactical information faster than any computer the Faldari had ever built. She had already identified her next target, Prince Dal Corvacus, who was currently enjoying his afternoon meal at a private table across the cafeteria. The prince was surrounded by 4 bodyguards, all armed with energy weapons and neural disruptors. The extra security didn't concern her. In fact, it made her job easier by confirming which Faldari were important enough to warrant protection. Prince Dal was known for his expensive tastes and his addiction to a drug called Shimmer, which enhanced sensory perception but also made users extremely vulnerable to certain types of poisoning. According to her intelligence files, consumed the drug every evening before dinner to enhance his appreciation of exotic foods. More importantly, he had personally tested the weapons used to kill Soman Lee. He had wanted to ensure they would cause maximum pain before death. Dr. Manesio Kong finished her lunch and returned to her laboratory, where she spent the afternoon analyzing plant samples and writing detailed reports about alien nutritional needs. Her work was genuinely useful, the dietary information she was gathering would help future human missions understand alien biology, but her real project was happening in a hidden compartment behind her equipment storage area. There, she was creating modified versions of common laboratory chemicals that would interact with Shimmer in very specific ways. That evening, she made her way through the station's service tunnels toward the residential section where Prince Dal maintained his quarters. The increased security made the corridors more dangerous, but she had been trained for exactly this type of environment. Her enhanced body moved with perfect silence through passages, barely wide enough for a human. Her modified organs allowed her to hold her breath for over an hour and filter toxins from her bloodstream. Her reinforced bones could support her weight while hanging from pipes or crawling through ventilation shafts. She was no longer entirely human, but she was still human enough to feel satisfaction at what she was about to do. Prince Dal's quarters were on the station's most exclusive level, reserved for royalty and high-ranking officials. The security here was far more sophisticated than what had protected General Thal, with multiple layers of sensors, guards, and automated defenses. But the prince had one weakness that all the security in the galaxy couldn't protect. His addiction to Shimmer made him predictable. Every evening, at exactly 1900 hours, he dismissed his bodyguards and retreated to his private chambers to consume his drug in secret. The addiction was considered shameful among Faldari nobility, so he insisted on complete privacy during his daily ritual. Dr. Manesio Kong waited in the ventilation system above his chambers. Listening to the sounds of the prince preparing his evening dose, she could hear him humming softly to himself, anticipating the enhanced sensations the drug would provide. When she finally acted, it was with surgical precision. A single drop of her modified compound, introduced into the prince's drug supply through a nearly invisible hole in the ventilation grate, was all that was needed. Prince Dal consumed his Shimmer as usual, settling back in his favorite chair to enjoy the enhanced sensory experience. For several minutes, everything seemed normal. Colors became more vivid, sounds became richer, and even the texture of his clothing felt more luxurious against his Scales then, his enhanced senses began to work against him. The modified compound Dr. Manesio Kong had created didn't kill directly. Instead, it amplified the shimmer's effects until the prince's nervous system couldn't handle the sensory overload. Every light became blinding, every sound became deafening, every touch became agony. Prince Dal collapsed, clawing at his eyes and ears as his own enhanced perceptions tortured him. His screams were muffled by the soundproofed walls of his private chambers. By the time his bodyguards found him the next morning, he was dead from what appeared to be a massive overdose of shimmer. The official investigation concluded that the prince had accidentally consumed too much of the drug, possibly due to his tolerance building up over years of use. It was a tragic but unsurprising end for someone known to have addiction problems. Emperor Corvacus attended his nephew's funeral with growing paranoia. Two key figures from the human attack were now dead within a week of each other. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. But he still had no proof of outside involvement. Colonel Morvac's investigation into the human personnel on the station had revealed nothing suspicious. Ambassador Song and her diplomatic team were exactly what they appeared to be: career diplomats focused on peaceful negotiation. The few human scientists and researchers on the station all had legitimate credentials and unremarkable backgrounds. But someone was killing his people, and the Emperor was beginning to suspect that humanity was far more dangerous than they pretended to be. His suspicions were confirmed 3 days later when another body was discovered. Captain Rex Valdris, who had commanded the security forces during the attack on the human delegation, was found dead in his quarters from what appeared to be an allergic reaction to his dinner. The medical examination showed that he had consumed a common station food that he had eaten safely hundreds of times before. What the doctors didn't know was that Dr. Manesio Kung had spent days studying Captain Valdris's eating habits and had identified a way to trigger a fatal allergic response using a combination of foods that would normally be harmless. The captain had died slowly and painfully, his throat closing as his immune system attacked his own body. His last thoughts were of confusion and terror as he realized something was very wrong but couldn't understand what was happening to him. With 3 key figures now dead, Emperor Corvacus could no longer dismiss the pattern. Someone was systematically eliminating everyone involved in the attack on the human diplomats, and they were doing it in ways that appeared natural or accidental. The Emperor called an emergency meeting with his remaining security staff. Only 5 beings attended. Everyone else who had participated in the operation was either dead or missing. "We have a problem," the Emperor announced without preamble. "Someone is hunting us." The room fell silent. Everyone present knew about the recent deaths, but hearing it stated so directly made the situation feel more real and more terrifying. "Your Majesty," said Intelligence. Director Kex. The final session of the Galactic Council was scheduled to begin at 0800 hours, station time. Representatives from 43 different species would vote on humanity's application for full membership, a process that should have been routine after months of negotiations. But Emperor Corvacus could barely focus on the political implications. In the past 2 weeks, he had lost 6 more of his key personnel to what appeared to be accidents, illnesses, and equipment failures. His paranoia had grown so intense that he now traveled everywhere with 12 bodyguards and refused to eat anything that hadn't been tested by 3 different medical scanners. Sleep had become impossible. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, and every unexpected sound made his 4 hearts race with terror. The mighty Emperor, who had once commanded the fear and respect of 47 star systems, now jumped at his own reflection. His remaining staff had noticed the change. Colonel Morvac reported that several subordinates had requested transfers to other assignments, claiming they no longer felt safe serving under the Emperor's command. The Valdari military, once the most disciplined force in the galaxy, was beginning to crack under the pressure of an enemy they couldn't see or understand. Ambassador Haijin Song, meanwhile, continued to play her role perfectly. She spent her days attending committee meetings, answering questions about human society, and giving interviews to galactic media outlets. Her message never changed. Humanity wanted only peace and cooperation. With their galactic neighbors, we understand that recent tragic events have created tension, she told the morning news broadcast. But we must not allow fear and suspicion to divide us. Humanity remains committed to finding peaceful solutions to all conflicts. Her words were broadcast throughout the galaxy, reinforcing the image of humans as gentle, reasonable beings who preferred negotiation to violence. No one suspected that while she spoke of peace, one of her fellow humans was systematically dismantling the Faldari power structure Dr. Manesio Kong had completed, her work with clinical efficiency. Every person involved in planning or executing the attack on the human delegation was now dead. With the exception of Emperor Corvacus himself, she had saved him for last deliberately. The others had been practice warm-up exercises to test the station's security and refine her methods. But the Emperor was the main target, the architect of Salman Lee's murder, and his death would require something special. As the council session began, Ambassador Song delivered humanity's final presentation with grace and dignity. She spoke of Earth's contributions to galactic science, their commitment to peaceful exploration, and their hope for a future where all species could work together for the common good. The other delegates listened with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. Some species genuinely supported human membership, while others harbored doubts about these rapidly advancing newcomers. But all of them were watching. Emperor Corvacus, more than the human ambassador, the Valdari leader sat in his designated area surrounded by his bodyguards. But his behavior was clearly erratic. His scales had lost their lustrous shine, his eyes darted constantly around the room, and his four hands trembled slightly as he gripped the arms of his chair. When it came time for him to address the council about humanity's application, his speech was rambling and unfocused. He spoke about the dangers of change, the importance of maintaining established order, and the need for careful consideration before admitting new members. But his heart wasn't in it. His mind was consumed by the growing certainty that death was stalking him through the corridors of Harmony Station. The voting proceeded as scheduled. One by one, the member species cast their ballots on humanity's application. To everyone's surprise, including Ambassador Song's, the vote was overwhelmingly positive. Even some species that had previously opposed human membership changed their position, apparently influenced by the Emperor's obvious instability. When the results were announced, humanity had been accepted into the Galactic Council with 38 votes in favor, 3 abstentions, and only 2 votes against. It was a diplomatic triumph that should have been celebrated throughout human space. Emperor Corvacus cast one of the 2 negative votes, but his opposition seemed weak and half-hearted. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out, he sat motionless in his chair, staring at nothing. "Your Majesty," Colonel Morvac said quietly, "we should return to your quarters. The security team has prepared a safe route." The Emperor nodded absently and allowed his bodyguards to escort him through the station's corridors. But even surrounded by 12 armed soldiers, he felt utterly alone and vulnerable. His quarters were on the highest security level of the station, protected by energy shields, motion detectors, and atmospheric sensors that could identify any foreign presence. The door was made of reinforced titanium steel composite and required 3 different biometric scans to open. Once inside, the Emperor dismissed his bodyguards with strict orders to remain stationed outside his door. He needed time alone to think, to plan, and to figure out how to survive whatever was hunting him. The lights in his chambers were set to their brightest setting. He had developed a fear of shadows in recent days, convinced that death might be hiding in any dark corner. His meal had been prepared by his personal chef and tested by medical scanners 3 times before being brought to his room, but as he sat down to eat, the lights suddenly flickered and went out. Emergency power should have activated immediately, but the room remained pitch black. The Emperor's communication system should have connected him to his guards, but it produced only silence. Even his personal energy shield, which should have been powered by an independent battery system, failed to respond to his commands. In the absolute darkness, a voice spoke in perfect Valdari. but with an accent the Emperor had never heard before. "Your Majesty," the voice said calmly, "I bring greetings from Salmon Lee." Emperor Corvacus tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. Terror had frozen his muscles and scattered his thoughts. In the darkness, he could hear movement, but couldn't identify where it was coming from. "Who are you?" he managed to whisper. "I'm exactly what you thought didn't exist," the voice replied. "I'm the part of humanity you never bothered to learn about." A small light appeared in the darkness, a handheld device that illuminated a woman's face. She appeared to be middle-aged, with graying hair and kind eyes behind simple glasses. She looked like a harmless academic, exactly the sort of person the Emperor had dismissed as weak and irrelevant. "Dr. Manesio Kong," he breathed. "That's one of my names," she confirmed. "But you can call me Baba Yaga." The Emperor's 4 hearts hammered against his ribs. He had heard human fairy tales during his studies of their culture, but had dismissed them as primitive superstitions. Now facing this ordinary-looking woman in the darkness of his chambers, those stories suddenly seemed terrifyingly real. "You killed my people," he said. "Trying to summon some of his old authority, yes," she replied simply. "Every single person who participated in murdering innocent diplomats under a flag of truce. It took me 3 weeks to work through the entire list. The Council will never believe humans are capable of this. They won't have to. Officially, this conversation isn't happening. Officially, I don't exist. Officially, your people died of natural causes and equipment failures." She moved closer, and the Emperor could see that her kind eyes held no mercy whatsoever. But unofficially, she continued, "The galaxy is about to learn something important about humanity. We came to the stars with peaceful intentions, but we didn't come defenseless. What happened next was not murder, it was education. The Emperor learned what it meant to face someone who had been genetically enhanced for strength, speed, and endurance beyond human norms. He discovered what it felt like to be hunted by someone whose cybernetic implants could process tactical information faster than his brain could form thoughts. Most importantly, he came to understand that the species he had dismissed as primitive mammals had spent centuries perfecting the art of war before they ever reached space. They had simply chosen not to advertise that fact to their galactic neighbors. Dr. Manesio Kong didn't kill him. Death would have been too simple, too clean, too easy to dismiss as another accident. Instead, she left him alive but broken, his mind shattered by terror and his body carefully damaged in ways that would heal but never let him forget. When station security finally breached his chambers 12 hours later, they found Emperor Corvacus curled in a corner, whimpering softly to himself. His forearms had been systematically broken at 17 different points each, but the breaks were clean and would heal properly with medical treatment. His scales had been removed in intricate patterns that spelled out Somin in ancient Korean characters. But the wounds had been treated to prevent permanent scarring. He would live, but he would carry those marks for the rest of his life. Most disturbing of all was his mental condition. The mighty Emperor who had once commanded fear and respect across 47 star systems could no longer speak coherently. He babbled about shadows with human faces, about fairy tale monsters that knew his deepest fears, and about the terrible price of underestimating peaceful people. The official report stated that His Imperial Majesty had suffered a severe psychological